Across many of our videos, we've given mention to some of the best generals of the Second World War. These were the men that executed inspired surprise attacks, brilliant counters, and battle-winning maneuvers. But in this video, we tell a different story. We present the abject failures, the cowardly, and the criminally incompetent. These are by far the worst generals of the Second World War. This video is brought to you by Manscaped.com. Thankfully, Christmas has come early and Manscaped is saving me from the anxiety of cutting myself shaving down there before my hot, totally not a spy date. First up, we have the classy Lawnmower 4.0, helping reduce nicks and cuts in your most sensitive areas. The Crop Reviver Ball Toner Spray and Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant should be the next items to stuff the stockings. Santa hasn't forgotten the Weed Whacker Nose and Ear Trimmer, of course, which uses skin-safe technology to prevent tugging and tears in your nose and ears. To top Christmas off, you're also covered head to toe by the Shears 2.0 Luxury 6-piece Stainless Steel Nail Kit. But wait, you forgot to unwrap your complimentary Shed Travel Bag and Manscaped Anti-Chafing Boxer Briefs. Don't wait, go to manscaped.com and use my promo code THEFRONT to get 20% off plus free international shipping plus the 2 free gifts. The United States produced some fine generals during the war, but also had its share of terrible ones. Foremost among the latter was Lloyd Fredendall. General Fredendall took command of the US Central Task Force comprising 39,000 men in Tunisia in late 1942. He was subordinated to the British First Army under Lieutenant General Sir Kenneth Anderson. Anderson was immediately suspicious of Fredendall, suspecting the American general's swaggering arrogance disguised his ineptitude. Fredendall flat out refused to use proper military terms, calling infantry walking boys and artillery pop guns. He didn't use grid coordinates either, referring to locations with phrases like, "the place that begins with C." His aides didn't even know what he meant, meaning no one knew precisely what his orders were. Fredendall never visited the front and refused to listen to the advice of people who had. He was also more concerned about getting a bulletproof Cadillac than giving orders. It's no surprise then that such an out-of-touch commander led his force into the worst US defeats of the war. Ordered to defend Kasserine Pass in the Atlas Mountains, Fredendall spread his force so thin that units couldn't support each other. When attacked, he sent his entire armored force ahead of his frontline troops to chase down Rommel's panzers. The Wehrmacht withdrew, then blew the US armor to pieces with artillery. The battle was a catastrophe and Fredendall was sacked. His replacement, General Patton, later said, "I cannot see what Fredendall did to justify his existence." Arrogance and overconfidence are common characteristics among history's worst generals. One of the best examples of a man with both of these traits was Italian Lieutenant General Sebastiano Visconti Prasca. Now, you might not have heard of this guy, but you've probably heard of the campaign he presided over, the Italian invasion of Greece. Greece was fairly close to Britain in the years leading up to the Second World War, and Mussolini, Italy's knockoff version of Hitler, was worried about this. Then came the supremely confident Visconti Prasca. A bodybuilder who spent more time in the gym than anywhere else, Visconti Prasca argued that his forces were more than capable of conquering Greece within a few weeks. Convinced, Mussolini manufactured an incident on the Albanian border and the Italian army marched in. But things did not go as planned. Even though Visconti Prasca had numerical superiority, the Greeks used the terrain to their advantage and halted the Italian advance a few kilometers into Greek territory. Visconti Prasca knew he needed more troops to win, but he was worried that if his army grew larger, command would be given to a full general and he would miss out on all the glory. While Visconti Prasca hit the gym and thought about medals, his army was forced onto the defensive by a tenacious Greek counterattack. Caught by surprise, the Italians retreated again and again. In fact, they were forced back past the Albanian border. Just 2 weeks into the invasion, Italy was worse off than if they'd just left the Greeks alone. The Germans had to save them and Visconti Prasca was sacked. Since we've already lambasted General Kulik in our other videos, we're going to shed some light on the USSR's second worst general of the war, Dimitri Pavlov. Pavlov's early career was pretty typical for Soviet high commanders. He fought in the Civil War in Spain and against the Japanese in the early 1930s. In 1940, one of his fellow generals, a bloke called Zhukov, organized a war game simulating an attack from the west. Zhukov commanded the enemy forces, which totally weren't Germans, and Pavlov commanded the Soviets. Zhukov launched a succession of rapid assaults and encircled Pavlov's forces. Even though he had a massive numerical advantage, Pavlov was smashed rather prophetically. On the evening of June 21st, 1941, Moscow sent emergency orders to all Red Army commanders. The Germans were invading. Pavlov got the message while he was watching a comedy play in Kiev. I suppose he wanted to get a few more laughs in before 4 years of misery, so he decided to watch the play to the end instead of rushing to his command post like every other general did. When he did take command, Pavlov suffered a major defeat at the Battle of Bialystok-Minsk. Within days, he was replaced and arrested. Stalin initially thought Pavlov was working for the enemy, but later realized he was just terrible at his job. Charged with criminal incompetence, Pavlov was stripped of his accolades and rank, shot, and his body was thrown into a rubbish pit. Circumstance can curse some generals just as much as it blesses others, and when combined with strategic oversights and narrow thinking, it can spell disaster. Nowhere was this more evident than during the fall of Singapore under the British Lieutenant General Arthur Percival. Percival was given command of Singapore and Malaya in April 1941, but he wasn't pleased. He worried that if the British weren't attacked, he'd have nothing to do, and if they were, that he'd be in, quote, a pretty sticky business with the inadequate forces which are usually to be found in the distant parts of our empire in the early stages of the war. His forces were inexperienced, and one of Percival's first initiatives was to properly train them. The Japanese, on the other hand, were experienced, and their commander, General Yamashita, knew what he was doing. On December 8th, the Japanese landed in Malaya and subsequently pushed the British forces back to Singapore. Using bicycles and jungle tracks, they advanced through areas Percival had deemed impassable and consistently surprised the defenders. After retreating to Singapore and losing 50,000 troops to an army of 36,000 Japanese, Percival failed to set up adequate defenses, believing it would lower morale. He also spread his forces thinly and firmly believed an attack would come from the northeast. When the Japanese attacked from the northwest, Percival's men were overwhelmed. Despite Churchill's insistence that Singapore fight to the last man, Percival surrendered his entire 85,000 strong garrison to Yamashita's undersupplied and almost out of ammo army. It was the greatest defeat in British history. As a general, it's good to have confidence in your men and trust them to make the best of their situation. But fighting spirit won't solve every problem, especially supply problems. One man knew this better than anyone, Maj Gen Renya Motoguchi of the Imperial Japanese Army. Taking command of the 15th Army in 1943, Motoguchi was sent to Burma to continue Japan's southward advance. Not one to listen to faraway superiors, Motoguchi decided to launch his own campaign and march into Assam, the gateway to British India. To do this, he needed long supply lines, but Burma had few paved roads, and he had no trucks. The wisdom of Genghis Khan. Packing supplies onto sheep and cattle, Motoguchi planned for his army to eat their own supply line as they advanced. Allied forces traded space for time, moving back to prepared positions around the settlement of Imphal. By the time the Japanese reached them, they had eaten all of their sheep and nearly all of their cattle, meaning soldiers had to lug heavy equipment themselves. Weapons were discarded and starvation set in. Japanese infantrymen were given just 20 days food ration for what became a 4-month campaign. While the Allies were resupplied by air, Japanese losses to starvation mounted. Motoguchi lost 55,000 men of his 90,000 total strength to starvation, all because he couldn't organize proper supply. When his 3 divisional commanders began pulling their dying soldiers back, Motoguchi flew into a rage and fired them. Only 12,000 emaciated men made it back to Japan from the catastrophe at Imphal. Motoguchi survived the war and later shamelessly distributed pamphlets at veterans' funerals claiming he had actually won the battle. After the panzers streamed through the Ardennes into France in May 1940, the French government replaced the overall commander of their forces, General Gamelin, with the celebrated Great War General Maximus. General Huegel's first order was to cancel his predecessor's orders, which included a vital counterattack, thereby allowing German infantry time to catch up with their isolated armored units. He spent the next 48 hours attending dinners and meetings with various dignitaries. In that time, the Germans consolidated their position. When Huegel finally counterattacked using the same plan he had originally cancelled, it was easily rebuffed by a strong German front line. After his failure, Huegel was consumed by defeatism and urged his army to surrender. Before Paris was in German hands, he had already decided that further fighting was pointless and total capitulation was the best option. He collaborated with the SS after France's fall to discriminate against Jews, communists, Freemasons, and French patriots. Later, he was imprisoned in Castle Itta, only to be released after the strangest battle of the Second World War. Those were 6 stories of the worst generals of the Second World War, but what do you think? Why do you think Fredendall refused to use military terms? Can you think of a worse idea than having soldiers eat their own supply line? And lastly, which general do you think was the worst out of a really bad bunch? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, and as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.